Once celebrated as the lucky country, Australia boasted cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide that constantly featured in most livable charts. We have avoided the recession during global financial crisis. However, today we face a transformed economic landscape. Cost of living is escalating, interest rates are soaring, and small businesses are grappling to survive. RBA has cut the interest rates recently, but is it enough? And what impact will it have? On the global front, trade tensions are sending shock waves throughout the world, and Australia is no exception. With immigration levels remaining significantly higher, what does it mean for Australian economy and daily lives of its citizens? Have you felt the pressure of rising costs? If yes, stay tuned. This is Fanindra and you're watching NRI Talks. Australia, dubbed as the lucky country by author Donald Horne in 1964, recognized more for its fortune rather than merit. Yet, the phrase evolved into a symbol of prosperity, with Australia performing consistently well in GDP per capita and showing economic stability. Today, that luck is being tested by rising inflation, global economic pressures, and soaring interest rates. To get more insights, I've reached out to Professor Gigi Foster, professor at University of New South Wales, respected voice in public policy, and a renowned commentator and social and economic issues. Professor, the big question on everyone's mind currently is, are we still the lucky country?
I'd like to say so, and I'm certainly still living here, obviously, with my family. But I do think that we've lost our way in a number of different dimensions, and that showed during the COVID era. I think we saw a lot of incompetence, blindness, and really lack of maturity in our leadership class, as well as kind of an entrenchment of power and what that can do in the realm of policymaking. So I feel that we are indeed squandering many of our resources now. We're still very resource rich, and so we have the potential to be very well off and indeed quite lucky in that sense. But we really haven't done the best with the resources we have been blessed with. And so I think I'd like to see Australia turn around and become more a country that really enacts policies for its people rather than wasting the resources it has.
With inflation continuing to strain household budgets and economic growth showing signs of slowing down, the RBA has taken action.
Charles, interest rate cut down 0.25, so the official cash rate is now 4.1%.
But is this the right move, and is this enough?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that a lot of punters and people on the street, I think, have increasingly blamed the Reserve Bank for the inflation problem that we've had over the last few years. But that is, I think, a bit in error. It's certainly disproportionate to the amount of blame that the RBA deserves for the inflation problem. The inflation problem actually began with our excessive fiscal stimulus during the COVID era, while at the same time our government leaders pressed pause on economies around the country. And that, of course, is going to create inflationary conditions. In fact, at the time I was predicting stagflation, a repeat of the mid-1970s problem where you had stagnation economically in the real economy plus inflation in the monetary economy. And we haven't exactly seen that. We've seen sort of a stuttering and sputtering ahead sort of economy, but also, of course, inflation. And because inflation is about rates of change in prices, I guess people think of monetary policy as the big mover behind that. Of course, inflation targeting is one of the things the RBA does, but monetary policy in the form of setting interest rates and open market operations is not the only thing that feeds into the inflation rate, nor into economic growth. So while I do understand the decision to lower the interest rate by 25 basis points, it was a very politically popular decision, clearly. I mean, there were picketers outside the RBA before Michelle Bullock and her committee handed down the decision. I can understand why she would do that. I do think that the impact on the economy, particularly the real economy, is probably going to be a lot less than some people may be hoping for. And I do think there is a bit of a risk that inflation may continue upwards, which is the main sort of problem that the RBA committee highlighted in their statement. The worry is that they've started to reduce rates too soon, and then perhaps inflation is still going to march ahead a bit or not continue its decline towards the midpoint of the target rate range. And that would be a problem if inflation expectations get sort of set at a level that's too high. From the statement, I would guess that probably the bank is forecasting not to lower rates again this year, or at least for the next couple of meetings.
With immigration levels reaching some of the highest levels in the recent times, debates have intensified around its impact on Australian economy.
Skilled immigration is something that I think the country can benefit from, particularly when it's from countries where the people speak English or at least know English, and where cultures are roughly kind of aligned in terms of Australian values, or where the people are genuinely determined to assimilate to Australian values. Well, we're bringing in somewhere around 500,000 people a year, and I do want to emphasize and recognize that Australia is in large part a nation of immigrants. I'm an immigrant, you're probably an immigrant as well, and of course much of the country was built on the backs of immigrant labor. So we can't really say immigration is always bad for Australia. Clearly not, if you look through history. But the types of immigration that we now see in the country, I think, are not necessarily optimal for the country's long-term health. We bring in an awful lot of, for example, international students who come and take part in our programs in our universities, in the massified education programs that we now offer. And I've studied this for years. I put out a paper more than 10 years ago about the impact that this has on learning standards and actual learning levels within our classrooms, and it's not always positive.
While we Australians scramble through these challenges, on the other side of the world, this happened.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Trump is back in the White House, securing a second term, and with it, a renewed vow to impose tariffs that could shake the global economy.
Well, from what I see of Trump's behavior, he tends to be quite friendly with countries who, in his estimation, have been friendly towards the United States. And one measure of that friendship is taken a lot of U.S. exports. And Australia does that. Right? We actually buy more stuff from the U.S. than the U.S. buys from us. And Trump has been recorded saying that he's very positive about that, and he's very much prone to deals. He's very much of a deal maker himself. So I suspect actually that Australia will manage to wriggle out of the worst of the Trump tariffs, and I don't actually suspect that we're going to have too much of a problem in the real economy from those tariffs. I think if anything, we may stand in the longer run to gain from observing what Team Trump is doing over there in the United States, wiping out some of, or at least at the moment shining a light on, some of the corruption in government and some of the overspending and wasteful spending, and importantly, spending that is not aligned with the interests of the people. That's the key point to make.
Australia stands at critical crossroads. Inflation, global trade pressures, and economic pressures are tightening their grip. In times like this, decisive action is not just necessary, it's urgent.
Well, certainly we've just had a bit of relief with the RBA interest rate reduction, and that's in the short term going to be helpful for the mortgage holders, although it may in the long run mean that demand for housing picks up, which of course may mean that the prices go up in housing, so that's not really a long-term solution. We do want to see, I definitely want to see less waste in government expenditure, and so when we see things like the Made in Australia, Act and all of these subsidies for these supposedly greener but not really technologies, which just don't have a chance at the moment of fulfilling baseload capacity for us. That's just a fantasy land, and we need to get out of that fantasy land. That's one really good example of how we are just burning resources here for the sake of what looks good rather than what actually is good to help Australia. And when Australians are better off, they will be willing and able to spend more money on everything that matters to people, including the environment. So we actually sacrifice our environment as well when we pursue harebrained policy schemes. So I'd like to see more sanity in the direction in which our tax dollars are being spent. And I'd like to see some effort towards understanding the productivity problem as well. Productivity has been in a slump for years, and we really haven't determined why. I mean, it is true that a lot of the jobs added in the recent past have been in the public sector, which is not the sector in which productivity tends to be the highest. So one problem is we have perhaps too many government employees who aren't being productive enough. But even in the private sector, I have the sense that there's a lot of red tape strangulating the innovation of Australians. And I know this is definitely the case in a couple of sectors I've been investigating recently, and I suspect it's the case more broadly. So I'd like to have a focus on red tape reduction, productivity support, and indeed just in general a sense that every dollar is precious and every dollar can buy us welfare if not wasted. And so maybe some scrutiny by citizens over how those monies are spent.
Hope you found that insightful. Please do not hesitate to express your views in the comment section. It shows your love by clicking on like, share and subscribe. Until next time, this is Fanindra and you've been watching NRI Talks.